My name is Brenda, and I'm 25 years old. I live in Belo Horizon, a lively city that is very passionate about football. My home is near Mineiro Stadium, the famous Criso Stadium, where I grew up watching games with my dad, a diehard supporter of the team. My dad used to dress me in Crusoe gear when I was little, and that's how I was introduced to the world of football in our home. Nowadays, I live with my parents and work as a secretary at a renowned dental clinic in the area, despite my job. Consumes a significant amount of my time, which I value because it allows me to be independent. I have never been in a committed relationship, but that doesn't mean I haven't been involved with anyone. Rather, I've chosen to be free and happy in this way, able to be with whoever I want without the hassles of a committed relationship. I think dating isn't for me because I always lose interest in people no matter how short they are, regardless of their age. I feel that I need more freedom to be myself, and that's forever. Since we live close to the Mineiro, it's common for relatives from other cities to come for the games and stay at our house. This time, I was especially excited because my cousin Ricardo finally accepted my invitation and was coming to visit with his two best friends Marcelo. I've also noticed that men look at me a lot because of my slim waist and curvy figure, and I honestly like it. We grew up together in Belo Horizon and were almost like siblings until his parents moved almost 10 years ago to take a better job offer. Since then, we've drifted apart, but we've stayed in touch through social media. To be honest, I had a crush on Julio Ricardo back then, and I'm sure he felt something for me too, but we never discussed it. About 2 years ago, we started talking more frequently, starting with lighthearted football chats and progressing to. My cousin Ricardo finally accepted my invitation to visit, and I think football was the push he needed to come. He mentioned that he would bring his friends Marcelo and Julio, which piqued my interest because Ricardo has always been a reserved person with few friends. Other topics included some flirtatious remarks. He has always been attractive to me, and the fact that we are cousins was never a problem, but every time I invited him, he always came up with some excuse. Can all sleep in the living room? The week went by quickly, and by Friday, I was ecstatic. The Crow game was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, but he and his friends chose to arrive a day earlier on Friday night. I thought this was fantastic because it meant we would have plenty of time to chat and even go out without any time constraints. The best part was that my parents would be away for the weekend because they had planned a trip to celebrate their wedding anniversary, so they left the house early, leaving it just for us. Chance to unwind and have fun. I worked all day, but my mind was on everything I needed to do to host them after work. I talked to my boss and was able to leave early. I went to the supermarket first, where I bought a lot of beers, soft drinks, and snacks. Being meticulous, I didn't cut corners. I got sausages, garlic, bread, potatoes, and even meat in case we decided to have a barbecue the following day. I knew they would arrive hungry, so I took a long, relaxing break before they arrived. The house was quiet as I waited for them to arrive, and I was particularly excited to see Ricardo, with whom I grew up but hadn't seen in person since he moved to Araguari almost 10 years ago. I took a bath, dressed comfortably but still looked good, wearing a fitted top that accentuated my slim waist and shorts that showed off my legs. I put on my favorite perfume, the one that always draws attention, and was pleased with the outcome when I looked in the mirror. Before I continue with the story, please remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Years ago, I was excited to meet Marcelo and Julio's friends, but I wasn't sure what to expect from them. The house was all ours, so the evening seemed promising. I was distracted on the sofa, listening to soft music and scrolling through my phone when I heard a series of honks outside. I hurried to the window to see what was going on, but as soon as I looked, I heard a muffled shout from the street. When they finally arrived, I ran through the house, grabbed the electronic gate remote from the living room table, and loudly pressed the button to open the garage. The gate opened slowly, and their car drove in. I stood at the living room door, grinning, and as soon as they got out, I went straight to meet Ricardo, eager to give him a hug. However, as I got closer, I was shocked to see that he was a tall, strong man instead of the boy I remembered. When he put me back down, I looked at him in surprise and said, "Oh my God, you've grown and gotten so strong." Ricardo responded, "You look more beautiful and fragrant than ever." "I've missed you, cousin," and we both laughed. Then I noticed his friends were getting out of the car, and I was astounded to see that they were extremely attractive and in excellent shape. Marcelo, in particular, immediately caught my eye. He was tall, blonde, and had fair skin and looked almost German. I wasted no time in introducing myself and embracing him with a smile. "Hello, I'm Brenda. Please come in." I felt his strong arm as he hugged me. Next, I introduced myself to Julio, who appeared to have just stepped off a basketball team. He was dark-skinned, had broad shoulders, and was so tall that I felt small next to him. When I gave him a hug, I had to look up, which made him laugh a little awkwardly. I laughed too, but I was truly impressed. I went to the kitchen, leaving the three of them to settle in the living room, but as soon as they walked through the door, they stood there, not knowing what to do. I laughed and said, "Guys, make yourselves at home. I'll get some cold beers and snacks for you." At that moment, the mood changed, and they began to cheer up, calling me an angel and thinking that I had saved the day. However, I soon noticed that Ricardo had followed me. "I'll help you, cousin. Let's go," he said with that familiar. He looked at me in surprise and said, "You've become quite the woman, Brenda." I smiled, accepted his assistance, and we went to the kitchen together to prepare everything. We talked about life and how close we were when we were younger. Ricardo also mentioned that I had left his friends a little flustered. I laughed a little embarrassed and said, "Oh, they'll get used to it because this is how I walk around the house, always comfortable." Of course, Ricardo didn't miss the chance. Ricardo has always had this easygoing manner, and I was used to it, but it was funny to see how things had changed after a few laughs. He asked about my parents and uncles, and I told him that they had gone on a trip to celebrate their wedding anniversary and that the house would be ours until Sunday, so everything is fair game. "Yeah," he said, with a sparkle in his eye, and I smiled already, picturing that this weekend would be promising. Gathered the snacks and beers. Went to the living room where Ricardo's friends were stretched out on the sofa waiting for us to return, and we soon began eating, drinking, and of course talking about football, a subject that always comes naturally to all three of them. They were enthralled with the game and knew everything there was to know about it, and whenever I shared any information about the games I had seen at the Mineiro, Marcelo remarked, "Wow, Brenda, you really know your football." Knowing that football has always been a part of my life, I laughed as they started to notice that I was talking about the most memorable games I had seen at the stadium, describing the atmosphere, the plays, and the goals. They seemed captivated, and I became the center of attention. Time passed quickly, the beers were going down, the atmosphere was getting more laid back, we laughed aloud, and the atmosphere was very comprehensible between conversations. I realized that I was beginning to really enjoy talking too. It had been a long time since I'd been in a relationship, and seeing them like that in my home made it impossible not to start imagining things. Julio, the tall, strong, dark-skinned man, had a commanding presence, and the way he looked at me, always smiling and watching, made me feel like I was being evaluated from head to toe. As I spoke, I noticed his eyes following me, and he seemed to find everything I said amusing, but at the same time, his intense gaze made my heart race. Germanic blonde appearance, but Julio was catching my eye more and more. He had a subtle charm that really pulled me in. Before the alcohol started to affect the group, Ricardo, my cousin, asked me to show up in the bathroom because he wanted to take a shower before bed because he was already a little tipsy and exhausted from the day. I got up to go with him, and as we walked, he said, "Chester, if I need help in the shower, can I call you?" I understood the joke right away, and without missing. When I returned to the living room, I found Marcelo nearly asleep on the couch. He was trying to stay awake, but his eyes kept closing and opening as if he were fighting sleep. I asked him, "Are you managing to stay awake?" And he smiled back, but it was obvious he wouldn't last much longer. Direction laughing stopped being cheeky, Ricardo. He simply laughed and went into the bathroom, closing the door behind him. I left him there knowing that a shower would help relieve his fatigue. "You're really an angel, Brenda, taking care of us like this, totally different from Ricardo, who's just a troublemaker," he said, covering Marcelo with a blanket, so he could get more comfortable. I laughed at the remark, knowing that Ricardo has always been the group's joker, but I liked hearing the compliment. Marcelo settled on the couch, and soon he was soundly asleep and breathing. I sat on the opposite side of the room, where Julio was still very much awake. Said, "It's just the two of us now, and soon your cousin will be asleep." I gave him a look full of desire, and he realized right away that it wasn't my fault because I had been drinking a little, and as everyone knows, alcohol tends to loosen people up and make them more cheerful. I laughed at the situation and replied, "Ricardo is still in the shower, but soon it'll be just us here." Julio raised an eyebrow, obviously amused by my remark, and told me that he was going outside for a smoke. Place for that. I told him that he could smoke in the backyard without any problems, and I invited him to join me. As I went forward, I noticed that he was staring at me as though he was fascinated by my gait. I thought it was funny and kept acting like I didn't notice, but I was enjoying the moment. In the backyard, Julio lit up a cigarette and took a long drag, slowly exhaling the smoke. He asked if I smoked too, and even though I don't normally, I ended up taking a few puffs today. As if testing the waters, Julio watched me with a smile, taking the cigarette from him and taking a light drag, enjoying the strong taste that always made me feel a little more relaxed. The atmosphere was changing, and it was becoming more and more clear what he had in mind, and to be honest, I was interested too. I asked Julio if he was single, saying that someone as attractive as him should definitely be in a relationship. He smiled and confirmed that he was single, revealing that he never liked to date. "I'd rather have several close friends than just one boyfriend," he said provocatively. I looked at him, realizing we were about to enter a game of seduction. I agreed, saying I preferred to be free and able to connect with multiple people. Julio then leaned in and asked what it would take for him to become one of those close friends I've made. I was surprised and commented that I thought exactly the same way and that people always judged me for not wanting a boyfriend. Said right away that he only needed to get closer and kiss me because I was there for that. He didn't need much to figure it out because he leaned in and kissed me, even dropping the cigarette to the ground. It was so intense that it seemed like we were already in love. The atmosphere quickly heated up, and before I knew it, Julio was kissing me on the backyard table with a passion I hadn't felt in a long time. The night was just getting started, and in the heat of the moment, we ended up totally giving ourselves to each other in my backyard. It was a powerful and freeing experience, and I allowed myself to be completely carried away. After it was over, I got up and asked Julio to keep that moment a secret. I told him not to tell my cousin, because it would be better if we forgot about it. Julio looked at me with a mixture of dissatisfaction and understanding that you're complicated, Binia, but don't worry, our secret is safe. I kissed him once more and asked him to get dressed so we could leave. When I got back inside the house and checked my phone, I saw that it was almost 2 a.m. Before going to my room, we cautiously entered the living room and discovered Ricardo and Marcelo already sound asleep, with Marcelo snoring on the floor and Ricardo sprawled on the couch. The night had been intense, but despite everything, I felt oddly content and relieved when I finally managed to fall into a deep sleep, feeling content and at peace. I woke up feeling refreshed, albeit with a slight hangover, and it was already. It's about 10 a.m, with 3 p.m. being the game's scheduled time. When I realized that we still had to make lunch, take a shower, get dressed, and of course go to the stadium, I jumped out of bed. Luckily, we lived close to the Mineiro, so that wouldn't be an issue. As soon as I opened the bedroom door, the smell of bacon and eggs filled the room. I went to the living room and discovered Julio and Ricardo still asleep, snoring loudly, exhausted from the previous night. To my surprise, I went into the kitchen. In an apron, Marcelo was preparing breakfast for everyone. He had prepared a real feast with an amazing variety of dishes. When he saw me coming, he had a shy good morning greeting and seemed embarrassed. He asked if I mind that he had used the kitchen, but I smiled and said that I was thrilled with his initiative and thanked him for taking on the responsibility of making breakfast for everyone. I tasted what he had prepared and was delighted by the flavor of everything. Was delectable, impressed, and I joked that he didn't seem to fit the description of a great cook. Marcelo smiled, a little embarrassed, but obviously grateful for the compliment. We sat down at the table and began talking, and I noticed that he was very different from the day before. Yesterday, he appeared worn out and reserved, but today, as we spoke, I realized how genuinely beautiful and talented he was. His clear eyes caught my attention, and I started to think about getting involved. Since I had been with Julio, I thought I might try something with Marcelo as well. I noticed that he looked at me and seemed interested, so I decided to use the same strategy one had used with Julio. I asked Marcelo if he was dating anyone, and he said that he was too focused on his studies and job to be in a relationship. I then asked him how he handled the fact that he didn't have a partner in his spare time, and he laughed a little embarrassed and said that everyone handles it differently. He asked me if I had someone for that purpose after noticing that I was not wearing a ring. I was surprised by this question, but I smiled and told him that I wasn't in a serious relationship and that I was free to live my life as I wanted. As the conversation heated up, I realized that Marcelo was clearly interested in me, and that the idea of being with me no longer seemed like a curiosity, but rather an opportunity that one was willing to explore. I was direct and asked Marcelo what he thought of me, and if I was his type, I wanted to take advantage of the opportunity. After a few seconds of silence, Marcelo finally admitted that he had been interested in me since the first time he saw me. He found me. Marcelo had seemed a little taken aback by the question, but he quickly confirmed, shaking his head and saying somewhat hesitantly that yes, I was his type. However, he mentioned that I was Ricardo's cousin, which made him see me almost as a sister to his best friend. I laughed and said that didn't matter. I was just a distant cousin. Beautiful, and after we began talking in the living room yesterday, he was enchanted, but sleep was stronger, so he fell asleep. At this point, I had an idea. I asked Marcelo to follow me quietly, and I led him to the kitchen, where I asked him to turn off the stove. Without hesitation, Marcelo did so, and we made our way to my room. We had to move quickly to avoid waking up the guys who were still asleep in the living room, and the tension and excitement in the air made the moment even more EXE. We stayed there for a while, enjoying a moment and exploring everything the German had to offer. We knew we couldn't take too long, so it was a quick affair. As soon as I opened the bedroom door, I dragged Marcelo inside promptly, and before I even closed the door, I gave him a passionate kiss that pushed him towards the bed. He didn't hesitate to return the kiss, mating each kiss and caressing everything he could without hurrying. I was relieved by his response and felt confident in his ability to be trustworthy.
Marcelo is a laid-back guy.
After gathering my thoughts, I went to the living room to wake up my cousin and Julio, who were both unconscious and complaining of a bad hangover. I made sure to explain to him the same agreement I had with Julio. This would remain between us, and no one else could know or repeat it, concerning headaches and exhaustion, so I gave them some time to gather. After a while, we all gathered for the breakfast Marcelo had prepared. The table was generous, which helped lighten the mood. We talked briefly about our daily lives and realized that time had passed quickly. Since having lunch before the game was out of the question, we decided that the best course of action was to get ready and go directly to Mineiro. After all, the game would start soon while the guys were finishing up. Was prepared for them, so I quickly showered and dressed efficiently in anticipation of the game. Once everyone was ready, we got in the car and drove to the stadium, where there was a long queue to enter. Despite the chaos and rush, we managed to enter and, after some effort, found our seats in the stands, with Julio to my right, Marcelo to my left, and my cousin close by. The tension in the air wasn't just due to the game, either. It was impossible to miss how both Julio and Marcelo were trying to please me in different ways, and I was obviously enjoying the attention. They seemed to be competing to see who could win me over more at that moment, which amused me and gave me a sense of power. Julio kept giving me subtle glances, as if they were competing with each other with a mischievous smile. Before I could respond, Marcelo jumped in and asked if I was thirsty, offering to get me a beer. When the game ended, the sun was already setting and we hadn't even realized how quickly time had passed. It took us a while to leave the stadium because of the crowd, but we eventually managed to get home in the car, and I sat in the front. In reality, though, the Real show was taking place in the stands, where both of them were trying to impress me. We enjoyed the game as if there were no tomorrow, cheering and celebrating each play. We took several pictures of the field and of ourselves cheering. Fortunately, I had already stopped by the market earlier and bought everything we needed, or else the store would have been almost closed. I left the barbecue to the guys and went to take a shower, changing into something more comfortable because after such a busy day, all I wanted was to relax. Ricardo was driving, and Julio and Marcelo were in the back, exchanging glances with me through the rearview mirror when we arrived and parked in the garage. I knew that everyone would notice my loose dress that accentuated my body, especially my backside, which was prominently displayed. When I got to the barbecue, the guys turned to stare at me as soon as they smelt my perfume, and I felt a little embarrassed by how intense their stares were. My cousin, who is always playful, made a light remark. "Was that? Come over and try the sausage. It's cooked just the way you like it." I was already starving, so I accepted the offer and went to the grill. Enjoying the moment, as though it were our last barbecue, we ate all the meat and drank a little more. After that, we stretched out on the couch in the living room and fell asleep there until the sun came up. My parents' loud noise as they returned from their wedding trip rudely woke us up, especially when they noticed my cousin Ricardo displaying a longing that seemed to have lasted 10 years, which was actually quite accurate. The house was soon filled with excitement as everyone woke up, and we quickly made breakfast because the guys had to return to Araguari as soon as possible because it would be a long drive. After one final conversation to catch up, it was time to say goodbye. About half an hour after they left, I got a message on my phone from my cousin Ricardo, who thanked me for the kind hospitality and said he was already organizing the next visit. He also mentioned that there would be another big game in October, and this time the three of us would be going home. I was thrilled when he said that Julio and Marcelo would return to watch it with me. I promptly responded that I was anticipating it and that it was already scheduled, but that due to recent developments, my plan for the next visit now involves a different target, my own cousin.